story. Matthew Whitehead sat at his polished mahogany desk in the study of his penthouse apartment, his attention fixed on the case files before him. The clock on his desk showed 11:45 p.m., but time meant little when work needed to be done. His tailored charcoal suit remained pristine despite the late hour, not a wrinkle in sight. The soft glow of his desk lamp illuminated the precise stack of documents he was reviewing. The quiet rustle of expensive fabric announced Catherine's arrival before she entered his study. Matthew didn't look up immediately, his pen continuing its steady movement across the legal pad before him. Catherine's designer heels clicked against the floor as she approached his desk, each step deliberate and theatrical. "Darling," Catherine's voice dripped with false sweetness, a tone Matthew had grown to recognize as preceding something particularly nasty. "I have something to share with you." Matthew finally raised his eyes to meet hers. Catherine stood before him in a black designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her perfectly manicured hands held something behind her back, and her red lips curved into a smile. "Since you're so interested in family secrets," Catherine's voice took on a taunting edge as she pulled her hands from behind her back, "here's a big one." She threw a stack of photographs onto his desk, scattering them across his meticulously arranged papers. Matthew's hand stilled on his legal pad as his eyes fell on the topmost photograph. The image showed his father, Frederick, with his arms wrapped around Catherine at a secluded beach house. Their faces were close, intimate, their expressions speaking of far more than a father-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship should. "Those father-son fishing trips?" Catherine continued, her voice rising with barely contained glee. "Your dad and I were at our beach house, planning our new life." She placed both hands on his desk, leaning forward to ensure she had his full attention. "I'm carrying your father's kid, and your mother's already decorated the nursery." Matthew's face remained impassive as he picked up one of the photographs, studying it with the same careful attention he gave to his legal documents. The date stamp showed 3 months ago. He set it down precisely, aligning it with the edge of his desk. "Is that all?" His voice was quiet, controlled, devoid of any emotion that Catherine might have expected or hoped for. Catherine straightened up, her triumphant smile faltering slightly at his lack of reaction. "What do you mean, is that all?" "I just told you I'm having your father's baby." She grabbed another photo, shoving it closer to his face. "Look at these. While you were buried in your precious work, your father and I were building something real." Matthew's dark eyes met hers, and something in their depths made Catherine take an involuntary step back. "Your father always liked me better," she continued, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "He said you're boring, all work and no play. You should be more like him." A slight smile curved Matthew's lips, but it held no warmth. He reached for his phone, maintaining eye contact with Catherine as he pressed play on a recording. Catherine's own voice filled the study. "Once we get rid of him, Frederick, everything will be perfect. The fool trusts you completely. He'll never suspect his own father of stealing his company from under him." Frederick's deeper voice responded. "Matthew's always been too focused on his work to see what's right in front of him. We'll take everything he has, and he'll never see it coming." The color drained from Catherine's face as the recording continued, revealing conversation after conversation of their plotting and scheming. Her hands began to tremble as she realized the implications of what she was hearing. "The divorce papers are ready." Matthew's voice cut through the air like a blade, "and Dad's arrest warrant just came through." He stood slowly, his height allowing him to tower over her. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't investigate when my own father suddenly became so interested in spending time with my wife?" Catherine stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the expensive carpet. You knew? All this time?" "I knew the moment you started whispering with him at family dinners." Matthew's voice remained eerily calm. "I saw how you both looked at each other when you thought I wasn't watching. Did you enjoy planning my downfall while sharing my bed?" "Matthew." Catherine's voice cracked as she tried to regain her composure. "Save it." He cut her off, walking around his desk with measured steps. "Every phone call, every meeting, every little scheme you two plotted. I have it all documented. The evidence of your affair is actually the least of your problems." He picked up one of the photographs, examining it before letting it fall back to his desk. Did my father tell you about his dealings with Elias Lutz? About the money laundering? The bribes? Catherine's face went from pale to ashen. I don't know what you're talking about. No. Matthew's smile grew colder. That's funny, because I have recordings of you discussing exactly that with him, planning how you'd use the evidence to blackmail him if he ever turned against you. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. You should have been more careful about where you had those conversations, Catherine. Beach houses can be so easily bugged. You can't do this, Catherine whispered. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated. You'll destroy everything. That's the point. Matthew returned to his desk, sitting down with the same careful precision he'd shown all evening. You and my father wanted to take everything from me. Instead, I'm going to take everything from you. He opened his desk drawer and removed a thick envelope. The divorce papers are on top. The evidence packages for the police are underneath. I suggest you start looking for a good criminal defense lawyer. Catherine's legs gave out, and she sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Please, Matthew. We can talk about this. We can work something out. Like you and my father worked something out? Matthew's voice held a hint of amusement. No, Catherine. There's nothing to discuss. You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. What about the baby? She placed a protective hand over her stomach. It's your sibling. Half-sibling, Matthew corrected coldly. And don't worry about the child. I've already arranged for full custody once it's born. Given the evidence I have against both you and my father, no judge will rule in your favor. Catherine's face contorted with rage, her mask of vulnerability dropping away. You heartless bastard. You're just like your father, manipulative, calculating. The difference, Matthew interrupted, is that I don't pretend to be anything else. Now get out of my study. My lawyers will contact you in the morning. Catherine stood on shaky legs, her designer dress now wrinkled, her perfect makeup streaked with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. She walked to the door, then turned back. I loved you once, you know. Matthew didn't look up from his work. No, you didn't. You loved what I could give you. There's a difference. He picked up his pen, effectively dismissing her. Goodbye, Catherine. The sound of her heels faded as she left the study, followed by the distant slam of their bedroom door. Matthew continued working, his pen moving across the paper with the same steady precision it had shown all evening. The photographs of his wife and father's betrayal lay scattered across his desk, ignored. He had prepared for this moment for months, gathering evidence, building his case, waiting for either Catherine or his father to make their move. They had underestimated him, assumed his focus on work meant he was oblivious to their scheming. They'd never suspected that behind his reserved exterior lay a mind capable of orchestrating their complete destruction. Matthew reached for his phone again, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he needed. It rang twice before being answered. Blake? Move forward with Phase 2. They've made their move. He paused, listening to the response. Yes, everything went exactly as expected. Have the surveillance teams ready to monitor both targets. I want to know every move they make from now until the arrest. He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. Catherine and his father had thought they were playing a game of chess. They hadn't realized they were merely pawns in a much larger match, one where Matthew had been moving pieces into position long before they'd made their first move. The game was far from over, but with tonight's revelation, the first major piece had fallen exactly where he'd planned. Now it was time to topple the rest of them, one by one, until nothing remained of the life his father and wife had built on betrayal and lies. The law firm's offices were nearly deserted when Matthew arrived the next morning, the early hour ensuring his privacy as he made his way to his corner office. His appearance betrayed nothing of the previous night's confrontation. His suit was impeccable, his manner composed, his movements precise and purposeful. He closed his office door behind him, engaging the lock with a soft click. The silence enveloped him as he moved to his desk, setting his briefcase down with practiced care. Inside were copies of every piece of evidence he'd accumulated over the past months: photographs, financial records, recorded conversations, all meticulously organized and cataloged. Matthew removed his phone from his pocket, scrolling through his contacts until he found Mindy O'Connor's number. Their friendship stretched back to childhood, predating his marriage to Catherine, his rise in the legal world, everything that had led to this moment. If there was anyone he could trust now, it was her. Mindy, he spoke as soon as she answered, his voice controlled but urgent. I need to see you right away. There must have been something in his tone that alerted her because she responded immediately. I'll be there in 15 minutes. While he waited, Matthew began laying out the evidence on his desk, creating a visual timeline of his father's corruption and his wife's betrayal. Each piece fit perfectly into place, telling a story of greed, manipulation, and calculated destruction. True to her word, Mindy arrived exactly 15 minutes later, her quick knock followed by Matthew disengaging the lock to let her in. She took one look at his face and knew something was terribly wrong. Matthew, she closed the door behind her, concern evident in her voice. What's happened? He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit down, Mindy. This might take a while. As she settled into the chair, Matthew remained standing, his hands resting on the back of his chair. Catherine's having an affair, he began, his voice clinically detached. With my father. Mindy's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the office. What? Matthew, are you sure? In response, he picked up one of the photographs and handed it to her. Mindy's eyes widened as she took in the image of Catherine and Frederick in an intimate embrace. She's pregnant, Matthew continued, his knuckles whitening slightly where they gripped the chair. With his child. That bitch. Mindy's voice shook with rage. I've always hated her, Matthew. I knew she wasn't good enough for you. But this? She looked up at him, her eyes blazing. How did you find out? She told me herself last night. A cold smile touched Matthew's lips. She thought she was delivering the killing blow. She didn't realize I've known about their affair for months. Mindy set the photograph down carefully. Months? You've known for months and didn't say anything? Matthew finally sat down, his movements controlled and deliberate. This isn't about emotions, Mindy. It's about strategy. He began spreading out more documents across his desk. While they were plotting to destroy me, I was gathering evidence. Not just of their affair, but of everything. Everything? Mindy leaned forward, her legal training kicking in as she began to examine the documents. I hired Blake Sweeney 3 months ago, Matthew explained, referring to the private investigator known for his precision and discretion. He's been tracking their movements, recording their conversations, following the money trail. He pulled out a thick file and opened it, revealing detailed financial records. My father's been using his position to receive bribes from Elias Lutz. He's been laundering money through shell companies, using company assets for personal gain. Every transaction, every meeting, every phone call. It's all documented. Mindy's eyes widened as she began to grasp the scope of what she was seeing. This is... Matthew, this is enough to destroy them both. That's the point. Matthew's voice was cold, determined. They wanted to take everything from me. Instead, I'm going to take everything from them. He stood again, moving to the window that overlooked the city. The divorce papers have already been prepared. The evidence has been organized for the prosecutors. By this time next week, my father will be facing criminal charges, and Catherine will be left with nothing. What do you need from me? Mindy asked, her loyalty evident in her immediate offer of support. Matthew turned back to face her. I need someone I can trust. Someone who knows the law as well as I do and won't hesitate to help me destroy them. You have me, Mindy said without hesitation. Whatever you need, I'm here. Good. Matthew returned to his desk, pulling out another file. Because this is just the beginning. Blake's discovered connections between my father and other corrupt officials. Once we start pulling at these threads, the whole network is going to unravel. He spread out more documents, revealing a complex web of corruption and deceit. We're not just taking down my father and Catherine. We're going to dismantle everything they've built, everyone they've worked with, every corrupt deal and illegal transaction. The fallout from this will be massive, Mindy observed, her legal mind already calculating the implications. Let it be. Matthew's voice was hard. They thought I was weak, too focused on my work to see what was happening around me. They mistook my patience for passivity, my precision for weakness. His eyes met Mindy's, and she saw the cold determination in them. I'm going to show them exactly how wrong they were. A knock at the door interrupted them. Matthew quickly gathered the documents, storing them safely in his briefcase before allowing the visitor to enter. It was his secretary, informing him that his first client of the day had arrived. We'll continue this later, he told Mindy as she stood to leave. Come to my office after hours. We have a lot of work to do. Mindy nodded, understanding the dismissal. At the door, she paused and turned back. Matthew? They deserve everything that's coming to them. A cold smile crossed his face. Yes, they do. And they're going to get it. Every last bit of it. As Mindy left, Matthew straightened his tie and prepared for his client meeting. To anyone watching, he appeared exactly as he always did. Professional, controlled, focused on his work. They wouldn't see the rage burning beneath his calm exterior, the calculated fury that was about to destroy everyone who had betrayed him. The game was in motion now, and Matthew intended to win. Not just win, annihilate. His father and Catherine had taught him a valuable lesson. Never trust anyone completely. It was a lesson he intended to repay with interest. Matthew sat in his office at the law firm, reviewing the latest report from Blake Sweeney. The private investigator had outdone himself, compiling a comprehensive dossier on Frederick's corrupt dealings that went far beyond what Matthew had initially suspected. The web of corruption stretched through City Hall, with tentacles reaching into various government departments and private businesses. A soft knock at his door interrupted his reading. Come in, he called out, knowing who it would be. Terry Wilson, his father's personal assistant, slipped into the office quietly, her movements betraying her nervousness. She was dressed conservatively in a simple black suit, her manner professional but guarded. Please, sit down, Terry. Matthew gestured to the chair across from his desk. He studied her carefully as she settled herself, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way she couldn't quite meet his eyes. I received your message, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. You said it was urgent. Matthew leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. Terry, I know everything. The color drained from her face, but before she could speak, Matthew held up a hand to stop her. I know about the offshore accounts, he continued, his voice steady and measured. I know about the meetings with Elias Lutz, the bribes, the shell companies. I know how my father has treated you, made you complicit in his schemes while holding your job security over your head. Terry's hands clutched her handbag tightly, her knuckles turning white. How did you find out? Matthew opened a folder on his desk, revealing photographs and documents. I've been watching, Terry. For months. I know you've been documenting everything, keeping your own records. He paused, studying her reaction. Smart move, by the way. Always good to have insurance. Mr. Whitehead, Matthew, please. Terry's voice trembled. Your father. If he finds out I've been keeping records, he won't hurt you. Matthew's voice hardened. I can protect you, Terry. You can help me end his reign. If you cooperate, I will ensure your safety and your future. Terry looked up, finally meeting his eyes. What kind of protection? Complete immunity from prosecution. A new position at a different firm, with better pay and better working conditions. Matthew leaned back in his chair. All you have to do is testify about what you've seen and provide access to those records I know you've been keeping. You don't understand, Terry whispered. It's not just your father. Elias Lutz, his connections. They're powerful people. I understand perfectly. Matthew stood and walked around his desk, sitting on the edge closer to Terry. Let me show you something. He opened his laptop and played a series of recordings. Terry's eyes widened as she heard Frederick's voice discussing illegal deals, heard Elias Lutz arranging bribes, heard her own voice in the background taking notes of these meetings. I have everything, Terry. Every meeting, every transaction, every threat. Matthew's voice softened slightly, including the times my father threatened you, made you fear for your job, your safety. I can protect you from all of it, but I need your help. Terry was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Finally, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a small USB drive. "I've been keeping records for 3 years," she said quietly. "Copies of every document, every transaction, audio recordings of meetings, photos of documents before they were shredded." Matthew took the drive carefully. "Why did you start keeping records?" "The first time I saw your father take a bribe from Mr. Lutz." Terry's voice strengthened slightly. "He made me falsify the accounting records to hide it. I knew someday someone would discover the truth. I wanted to be ready." "Smart woman." Matthew nodded approvingly. He inserted the drive into his laptop and began scanning through the files. His eyes narrowed as he read. "This is even more extensive than I thought." "Your father?" "He trusts me because he thinks I'm weak," Terry explained, her voice gaining confidence. "He never thought I'd dare to document anything, but I've seen everything. The deals with Lutz, the money laundering, the threats to other business owners. And now he's going to pay for that mistake," Matthew said, his voice cold. He looked up at Terry. "Are you ready to testify about all of this?" Terry straightened in her chair, a glimmer of strength showing through her usually timid demeanor. "Yes. It's time someone stopped them." "Good." Matthew stood and walked to his office door, locking it. "Let's go through everything you have. I want to know every detail, every transaction, every conversation. Leave nothing out." For the next several hours, Terry walked Matthew through her documentation. She revealed how Frederick had systematically built his corrupt empire, how he'd used threats and bribes to silence opposition, how Elias Lutz had provided political protection in exchange for kickbacks and favors. Meanwhile, across town, Frederick Whitehead sat in his luxurious office, unaware of the net closing around him. He was on the phone with Elias Lutz, their conversation casual, confident. "The merger's going through next week," Frederick said, lounging in his leather chair. "Once it's complete, we'll have control of the entire harbor development project." "Excellent." Lutz's voice crackled through the speaker. "The zoning changes will be approved by then. No one's asking any questions." "Perfect." Frederick smiled, pleased with how smoothly everything was going. Matthew's been too busy with his cases to pay attention to any of this. "Sometimes I wonder if that boy has any business sense at all." "Speaking of Matthew," Lutz said, his voice cautious, "have you heard from Catherine today?" Frederick's smile faded slightly. "No, why?" "Just checking. She seemed agitated when I saw her at the club this morning." "Women's problems, no doubt." Frederick dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Nothing to worry about. Everything's proceeding exactly as planned." As Frederick ended the call, satisfied with his position of power, he had no idea that his empire was about to crumble. In his arrogance, he'd created too many enemies, left too many loose ends. And his son, whom he dismissed as too focused on his legal work to notice anything else, had been quietly gathering every thread, preparing to pull them all at once. Catherine, meanwhile, sat in her favorite spa, trying to maintain her usual routine despite the growing panic in her chest. She tried calling Frederick several times, but he'd been dismissive, too busy with his own affairs to deal with her concerns. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach as she thought about Matthew's cold eyes, his calculated response to her revelation. She'd thought she was delivering the killing blow, expected him to break down, to rage, to give her the emotional response she'd been craving. Instead, he'd turned the tables so completely that she was still reeling from the shock. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her lawyer, informing her that the divorce papers had been officially filed. Attached was a preliminary list of evidence that would be presented in court. Catherine's hand trembled as she scrolled through the document, realizing for the first time just how thoroughly Matthew had documented everything. As the sun set over the city, 3 people sat in different locations, each unaware of how completely their world was about to change. Frederick in his office, secure in his power and corruption. Catherine in her spa, desperately trying to maintain her facade of control. And Matthew in his law office with Terry, methodically building the case that would destroy them all. The first act was drawing to a close, but the real drama was just beginning. Matthew had laid his groundwork carefully, positioned all his pieces precisely. Now it was time to watch them fall, one by one, until nothing remained of the corrupt empire his father had built, or the life his wife had tried to steal from him. The morning headlines blazed across every major news outlet in the city. Business mogul Frederick William under investigation for corruption. The story dominated the front pages, complete with photographs of Frederick at various charity events and business functions, his confident smile now taking on a sinister cast in light of the allegations. In his office at the law firm, Matthew watched the chaos unfold on multiple screens. Each news channel carried a different angle of the story, but the core remained the same. One of the city's most prominent businessmen was accused of widespread corruption, bribery, and fraud. His phone buzzed continuously with messages and calls, but he ignored them all. Instead, he focused on the financial reports streaming across his computer screen, watching as his father's company's stock price plummeted in real time. A knock at his door interrupted his observation. Blake Sweeney entered, carrying a thick folder. "The investors are pulling out exactly as predicted," Blake reported, his voice carrying its usual dry precision. "The major shareholders called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. Your father's trying to damage control, but nobody's buying it." Matthew nodded, his expression unchanged. "And Lutz?" His office issued a statement denying any connection to your father. Blake's lip curled slightly. "But we've already leaked the recordings to 3 different news outlets. They'll break that story within the hour." "Good." Matthew turned to face Blake fully. "What about Catherine?" "She's at the Ritz-Carlton, hasn't left her room since yesterday. She's tried calling your father 17 times. He hasn't answered once." Blake placed several surveillance photos on Matthew's desk. "She's also tried contacting some of your father's business associates. None of them will take her calls." A slight smile curved Matthew's lips. "They're already distancing themselves. Rats deserting a sinking ship." His phone rang again. His father's number? Matthew let it go to voicemail, as he had done with the previous 12 calls. He had no intention of speaking to Frederick until the man was completely cornered. "Sir?" Blake hesitated slightly. "There's something else. Your mother called the office this morning." Matthew's expression hardened. "I thought I made it clear. No contact." "She wasn't trying to reach you," Blake clarified. "She was calling to provide information. Apparently, your father's been moving assets into offshore accounts for years. She has records." This caught Matthew's attention. "What kind of records?" "Bank statements, transfer documents, correspondence with foreign banks. She's been collecting evidence since before your marriage to Catherine." Matthew leaned back in his chair, processing this new information. His mother had always seemed so oblivious to Frederick's schemes, but perhaps she'd been playing her own long game. "Get everything she has," he instructed Blake, "but maintain distance. I don't want any personal contact yet." "Understood." Blake gathered his papers. "One more thing, Elias Lutz is scheduled to appear at a press conference in an hour. Word is he's going to publicly sever ties with your father." "Perfect." Matthew turned back to his screens. "Make sure the media has those photos of them at the beach house before he takes the podium." As Blake left, Matthew pulled up his email. The press release he'd prepared weeks ago was ready to go. In it, his law firm announced they were launching an internal investigation into any cases that might have been compromised by Frederick Williams' corruption. It was a masterful piece of misdirection, appearing to take the moral high ground while actually positioning Matthew as a crusader for justice rather than a son destroying his father. Across town, Frederick William paced in his office, his usual composed demeanor cracking under pressure. His phone lay on his desk, messages and missed calls filling the screen. Business partners, political allies, social connections, all demanding explanations he couldn't give. "Get me Matthew," he barked at his new assistant. Terry had called in sick, another betrayal he hadn't seen coming. "I don't care how, just get him on the phone." "Sir?" The assistant's voice trembled slightly. "Your son's office says he's in meetings all day. They won't put any calls through." Frederick slammed his fist on his desk. "Then get me Catherine. She started this mess. She can help fix it. Mrs. Whitehead isn't accepting calls, sir. And there's something else." The assistant handed him a tablet. "The photos are everywhere now." Frederick's face drained of color as he looked at the screen. There he was with Catherine at the beach house, their secret getaway now exposed to the world. The timestamp on the photos matched perfectly with business trips he'd claimed to be taking, board meetings he'd said he was attending. His phone buzzed again. Another business partner pulling out of a deal. The empire he'd built was crumbling around him, and for the first time, Frederick William felt real fear. Meanwhile, at the Ritz-Carlton, Catherine sat in her luxury suite, watching her world collapse on multiple news channels. Her phone had finally stopped ringing. There was no one left to call. Frederick wouldn't answer, her friends had stopped responding, and even her family had sent a terse message asking her not to contact them until the scandal died down. She placed a hand on her stomach, where Frederick's child grew, the baby that was supposed to be her ticket to a better life. Now it felt like an anchor, dragging her down into the depths of this nightmare. A notification popped up on her phone, breaking news. She clicked it and felt her heart stop. There on the screen was a photograph of her and Frederick at their beach house, his hand possessively on her waist, both of them laughing at some private joke. The headline above it read, "Scandal Deepens. Business mogul's affair with son's wife exposed." Catherine ran to the bathroom, barely making it before she was violently ill. When she emerged, shaking and pale, her phone showed 3 missed calls from her divorce attorney. She didn't need to call back to know what he would say. With these photos public, any hope of a favorable settlement was gone. In his law firm office, Matthew watched all of this unfold with clinical detachment. Every piece was falling exactly where he'd planned, every reaction playing out precisely as he'd predicted. His father's desperate calls, Catherine's isolation, Lutz's attempt to distance himself, all of it had been calculated and accounted for. Blake's phone buzzed with another update. "Sir, Lutz is about to take the podium." Matthew turned up the volume on one of his screens. Elias Lutz approached the microphone, his usual confident swagger notably absent. Before he could speak, every major news outlet's feed updated with the new photos, Lutz and Frederick at the beach house, clearly visible in the background of Frederick and Catherine's tryst. Lutz faltered at the podium as his aide whispered urgently in his ear. The political veteran's face went ashen as he realized his prepared statement of denial was now worthless. Matthew allowed himself a small smile. By the end of the day, every major player in his father's corrupt network would be exposed. Their desperate attempts to save themselves would only serve to incriminate each other further. He picked up his phone and dialed Mindy's extension. "It's time for Phase 2. Get the legal team ready." The arrest warrant was executed with precision at exactly 9 a.m. Frederick William, despite his wealth and connections, was led out of his office building in handcuffs, his tailored suit doing little to maintain his dignity as photographers captured every moment. Matthew watched the arrest feed from his office, his expression unreadable as his father was placed in the back of a police car. Beside him, Mindy reviewed the latest documents from the prosecutor's office. "They're offering a deal," she said, her tone professional despite the personal nature of the case. "If he pleads guilty to the major charges, they'll drop some of the lesser ones." "No deals." Matthew's voice was cold. "We have enough evidence to convict him on every charge. I want him to face the maximum sentence possible." Mindy nodded, having expected this response. "The DA's office also wants to know if you'll testify." "Unnecessary." Terry's testimony, combined with the financial records and recordings, is more than enough. Besides, a slight smile curved his lips. "I think it will hurt him more to know I didn't even consider him worth confronting in person." His phone buzzed. Another update from Blake. "Sir, they've just arrested Lutz. It's all over the news." Matthew switched screens to see Elias Lutz being led out of his campaign office in handcuffs, his political career ending in real time as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. The man's face was a mask of fury and disbelief, his carefully crafted public image crumbling with each step toward the waiting police car. "His wife's already calling divorce attorneys," Blake continued, "and the party leadership is releasing a statement distancing themselves from him. They're calling for a special election to fill his seat." "Good." Matthew turned back to his computer. "Make sure his connection to the Harbor Development Project is highlighted in the next news cycle. I want every business deal they touch to be scrutinized." A knock at his office door interrupted them. His secretary entered, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Whitehead, your mother is here. She's demanding to see you." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Tell her I'm in meetings all day." She? She says she has more documents. About the offshore accounts. After a moment's consideration, Matthew nodded. Send her to conference room 3. Mindy, would you handle it? Get whatever information she has, but make no promises. As Mindy left to meet with his mother, Matthew turned his attention to the latest crisis. Catherine had finally emerged from her hotel room, and the paparazzi were having a field day. Photos of her trying to shield her face from cameras were already hitting the internet, her designer clothes and expensive accessories now making her look like a caricature of greed and betrayal. Her lawyer had made another attempt at negotiation, suggesting that her pregnancy might generate public sympathy. Matthew had responded by releasing the recordings of Catherine and Frederick plotting to take control of the company. Any public sympathy evaporated as people heard her cold calculations, her gleeful planning of her husband's destruction. She's been admitted to the hospital, Blake reported, placing a medical report on Matthew's desk. Stress-related complications with the pregnancy. Matthew glanced at the report without emotion. Have someone monitor the situation. I want to know immediately if anything changes with the child's condition. Already arranged. Blake hesitated. Sir, there's something else. We found evidence that your father had been planning this for years. The beach house, the affair with Catherine, it was all part of a larger scheme to take control of your shares in the company. Show me. Blake pulled out another file, this one containing emails dating back to before Matthew's marriage to Catherine. They revealed a calculated plan. Frederick had orchestrated the initial meeting between Matthew and Catherine, had encouraged the relationship, all while grooming her as his own lover and co-conspirator. Your father knew that if you died without an heir, your shares would revert to him, Blake explained. There are discussions about arranging an accident once Catherine was pregnant. Matthew absorbed this information with the same cold detachment he'd shown throughout the ordeal. Add it to the evidence for the prosecution. And Blake? Make sure my mother sees these emails. I want her to understand exactly what kind of man she was married to. As the day progressed, the fallout continued to spread. Business partners rushed to cooperate with authorities, each hoping to save themselves by providing evidence against Frederick and Lutz. The company's stock price continued to plummet as more details of the corruption emerged. In his prison cell, Frederick Williams sat on the narrow bed, his empire crumbling while he watched helplessly on a small television mounted in the corner. His calls for the best criminal defense attorneys had been met with polite refusals. No one wanted to be associated with such a toxic case. Catherine remained in the hospital, isolated and monitored. Her own family had issued a statement expressing their shock and disappointment at her actions, effectively cutting her off from her last potential support system. Matthew worked through it all with methodical precision, ensuring each new piece of evidence was properly documented and filed, each statement carefully crafted to tighten the noose around his father's neck. He showed no signs of the personal toll this might be taking, no indication that destroying his family affected him in any way. The hospital corridor was quiet as Matthew approached Catherine's room. He'd waited until visiting hours were nearly over, ensuring their conversation would be private. 2 security guards, his own, not hospital staff, stood outside her door. Catherine lay in the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily around her. She looked smaller somehow, her designer hospital gown and carefully applied makeup unable to hide her deteriorating condition. When Matthew entered, her eyes widened with a mixture of hope and fear. Matthew, her voice was hoarse. You came. Don't misunderstand, he replied, remaining near the door. This isn't a personal visit. We need to discuss the terms of your surrender. Catherine's hand moved protectively to her stomach. Surrender? What are you talking about? Matthew pulled out his phone, scrolling through documents. Your lawyers are still trying to negotiate a settlement. That ends now. You'll sign the divorce papers as they are, relinquishing all claims to my assets and property. You'll provide a full statement to the prosecutors about your involvement in my father's schemes. And you'll agree to terminate your parental rights once the child is born. You can't be serious. Catherine struggled to sit up. This is your sibling. Your own blood. Half-sibling, Matthew corrected coldly. The product of my wife's affair with my father. A child conceived as part of a plot to murder me and steal my company. He looked up from his phone. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about that part? The color drained from Catherine's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Matthew played another recording, Catherine's voice discussing with Frederick the possibility of Matthew having an accident once the pregnancy was confirmed. You see, Matthew's voice remained eerily calm. That's the difference between us, Catherine. You and my father plotted and schemed, but you were sloppy. You got caught up in your own cleverness, your own sense of superiority. You never imagined I might be playing a longer game. I gave you everything, Catherine whispered, tears beginning to fall. My youth, my beauty, my devotion. You gave me nothing, Matthew cut her off. Everything you did was calculated. Every moment of our marriage was a lie. You were my father's creature from the beginning. He chose you, groomed you, positioned you in my life. And you played your part perfectly, didn't you? The loving wife, so supportive of my career, so understanding of my long hours at work. All while you plotted my death with my own father. Catherine's hands twisted in the hospital sheets. It wasn't like that. Not at first. I did love you. The papers, Matthew interrupted, placing a thick envelope on her bed. Sign them now, or I release the murder plot evidence to the media. Your choice. You wouldn't. Catherine's voice shook. The scandal would hurt you too. Matthew smiled, and there was something terrible in that expression. Catherine, look around you. I've already destroyed my father's business empire, exposed his corruption, and had him arrested. I've ruined Elias Lutz's political career and implicated half the city's business elite in a corruption scandal. Do you really think I care about a little more negative publicity? He moved closer to the bed, his presence overwhelming in the small room. Sign the papers, Catherine. In this now, or I will destroy what's left of your reputation so thoroughly that even your own family won't acknowledge your existence. Catherine's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. What happens to the baby? My lawyers have already arranged everything. The child will be placed with a suitable family, far from this mess you and my father created. You'll have no contact, no rights, no connection of any kind. You're a monster, Catherine whispered as she began to sign. No, Matthew corrected her. I'm just better at this game than you and my father were. You taught me an important lesson, Catherine. Never trust anyone completely. It's a lesson I'll make sure you never forget. As Catherine signed page after page, her tears falling on the documents, Matthew watched with the same detached interest he might show a mildly engaging legal brief. When she finished, he collected the papers without a word. We're done here, he said, sliding the papers into his briefcase. My lawyers will handle any remaining details. Wait, Catherine called out as he turned to leave. What about your mother? Does she know everything? Matthew paused at the door. My mother provided evidence against Frederick going back years. Those offshore accounts you thought were so well hidden? She's been tracking them since before I met you. Catherine's face crumpled. So everyone was playing their own game. Everyone except me. That's where you're wrong. Matthew's voice held no sympathy. You played your game. You just played it poorly. He opened the door. Goodbye, Catherine. Don't try to contact me again. Matthew. Her voice rose desperately. What am I supposed to do now? Where am I supposed to go? He turned back one final time, his expression cold. That's not my concern. You chose your path when you conspired with my father. Now you get to walk it alone. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Catherine alone in her hospital room. Outside, Matthew handed the signed documents to one of his security team. Take these directly to Mindy, he instructed, and maintain surveillance on this room. I want to know if anyone tries to contact her. His phone buzzed with another message from Blake. Frederick was demanding to see him, offering to reveal everything in exchange for leniency. Matthew deleted the message without responding. His father's desperation was just another sign that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. In his car, Matthew reviewed the day's developments. His father in jail, Lutz's career destroyed, Catherine isolated and defeated. Each piece had fallen precisely where he'd intended. The media was focusing on the corruption angle, painting Matthew as the honest lawyer who'd exposed a web of corruption, rather than the ruthless son destroying his own family. He opened his laptop and began composing the press release that would accompany Catherine's signed confession. By morning, The last remnants of his father's empire would be in ruins, and everyone who had betrayed him would understand the true cost of their actions. His phone rang, Mindy calling with updates from the legal team. More evidence had emerged, more former associates of his father turning state's evidence to save themselves. Matthew listened with satisfaction. The tide hadn't just turned. It had become a tsunami, washing away everything his father and Catherine had built on their foundation of lies and betrayal. Matthew closed his laptop, his expression resolute. Phase 2 was complete. The trap had sprung perfectly, leaving his enemies broken and isolated. Now it was time to ensure that their destruction was absolute and permanent. There would be no chance of recovery, no possibility of redemption. He had promised them annihilation, and Matthew Whitehead always kept his promises. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Frederick William stood to hear the verdict. His expensive suit, once a symbol of his power, now hung loosely on his frame after months in custody. Behind him, the gallery was packed with reporters, former business associates, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the final act of his downfall. Matthew sat in the front row, his expression impassive as the jury foreman stood. He'd attended every day of the trial, watching as the evidence he'd meticulously gathered was presented piece by piece. Each witness had told their part of the story: Terry Wilson's detailed account of the corruption, former business partners turning against Frederick to save themselves, financial experts tracking the money through offshore accounts. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. On the count of tax evasion? Guilty. On the count of bribery? Guilty. Each verdict landed like a hammer blow. Frederick's shoulders sagged further with each pronouncement, his carefully maintained facade of confidence finally crumbling. In the defendant's section, Elias Lutz sat with his own legal team, his political career already in ruins. He tried to distance himself from Frederick, but the evidence had been too overwhelming. His own trial would begin next week, but today's verdicts had sealed his fate. The judge's voice cut through the murmurs. Frederick William, you have been found guilty of serious crimes against the public trust. Your actions have demonstrated a complete disregard for the law and a pattern of corruption that spans decades. Matthew watched his father's face as the judge continued. Taking into account the severity and duration of your crimes, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of... The number that followed represented the complete destruction of Frederick's financial empire. Every asset would be seized, every account emptied, every property sold. The man who had once commanded boardrooms would spend his remaining years in a prison cell. As the bailiffs approached to take Frederick away, he turned to look at Matthew. For the first time, there was something like respect in his eyes, a grudging acknowledgement that his son had outplayed him completely. Matthew, Frederick called out. Son. Matthew stood and gathered his briefcase, ignoring his father's attempt at communication. He had no interest in whatever Frederick might want to say. No last-minute confessions or attempts at reconciliation would change anything. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed around Matthew. Mr. Whitehead, how do you feel about your father's conviction? What are your plans for the company now? Do you have any comment on Catherine Prince's condition? Matthew faced the cameras with practiced composure. Justice has been served. The evidence spoke for itself. I have no further comment. In his office later that day, Mindy brought him the latest updates. Catherine lost the baby, she said quietly, placing the medical report on his desk. The doctors say the stress was too much. Matthew nodded, accepting the information without visible reaction. Make sure she receives proper medical care. Whatever else she's done, I won't have her death on my conscience. She's asking to see you again. No. Matthew's voice was firm. The divorce is final. There's nothing left to discuss. His phone buzzed with a message from Blake. The private investigator had been monitoring the fallout from the verdicts. Former business partners were scrambling to distance themselves from Frederick and Lutz, desperate to avoid being caught in the ongoing investigations. The DA's office wants to know if you'll make a statement at your father's formal sentencing next week, Mindy said, reviewing her notes. Not necessary. The evidence did all the talking needed. Matthew turned to his computer, pulling up the latest reports on the company's reorganization. What's the status of the audit? The forensic accountants have traced most of the missing funds. They're recommending a complete restructuring of the board and executive team. Matthew nodded, satisfied. The company would survive, cleansed of his father's corruption. He'd already begun implementing new oversight measures, ensuring nothing like this could happen again. A knock at the door interrupted them. Matthew's secretary entered with another update. Catherine had been released from the hospital. She'd moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, all her former friends and social connections having abandoned her. Her family's still refusing contact, the secretary added. And the press is camped outside her building. Increase her security detail, Matthew instructed. I don't want her doing anything desperate. Make sure she has whatever medical care she needs, but maintain distance. No direct contact. The day continued with a steady stream of updates and reports. Frederick's conviction had triggered a cascade of investigations throughout the business community. Former associates were turning on each other, each trying to save themselves as the authorities uncovered more connections to the corruption. Mindy stayed late, helping Matthew sort through the chaos. Your mother called again, she mentioned carefully. She wants to meet. Matthew paused in his work, considering. His mother had provided crucial evidence against Frederick, proving she'd been documenting his crimes for years. She'd played her own long game, waiting for the right moment to strike. Not yet, he decided. There are still too many loose ends to tie up. As night fell over the city, Matthew stood at his office window, surveying the empire he'd reclaimed. His father was headed to prison, his wife was isolated and broken, and everyone who had conspired against him had been destroyed. He'd accomplished exactly what he'd set out to do. But there was no satisfaction in the victory, no sense of triumph. Only a cold certainty that he'd done what was necessary, that he'd shown everyone the cost of betrayal. His phone buzzed one final time, another message from the prison. Frederick was still requesting a meeting, still trying to explain himself. Matthew deleted the message without reading it. Some betrayals went too deep for explanations. Some wounds could never be healed. He returned to his desk and continued working. There were still details to handle, loose ends to tie up. The company needed restructuring, the investigations were ongoing, and he had to ensure that every trace of his father's corruption was eliminated. The decision to meet with his mother came 3 months after Frederick's conviction. The restaurant Matthew chose was private, discreet, far from the media's prying eyes. Elizabeth Whitehead arrived precisely on time, her elegant appearance masking the strain of recent months. Matthew, she said softly as she sat down. Thank you for agreeing to see me. He studied her carefully, noting the new lines around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. You took a significant risk, collecting evidence against him all those years. I had to protect you, Elizabeth replied. Your father. I saw what he was becoming, what he was capable of. When he started grooming Catherine, I knew I had to act. You could have warned me. Would you have believed me? She met his gaze steadily. Frederick had you convinced he was the perfect father, the successful businessman showing his son the ropes. If I'd tried to tell you the truth then, he would have turned you against me completely. Matthew couldn't argue with her logic. His younger self had idolized Frederick, believing every carefully crafted lie. Why did you stay with him so long? To gather evidence, Elizabeth's voice hardened slightly. To build a case so strong he couldn't possibly escape it. I knew eventually he'd make a mistake, become too confident. When he started the affair with Catherine, I knew that was my chance. Their conversation was interrupted by the waiter bringing drinks. When they were alone again, Elizabeth leaned forward. I want you to know, I'm proud of how you handled everything. You showed strength I wasn't sure you had. I learned from watching both of you, Matthew replied coolly. You and Frederick. You both taught me the importance of patience, of playing the long game. We did, Elizabeth acknowledged. But you surpassed both your teachers. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I've been thinking about the future, about rebuilding our relationship. Matthew studied his drink, considering. His mother had proven herself an ally, had helped bring down Frederick, but trust didn't come easily to him anymore. It will take time, he said finally. I understand. Elizabeth reached into her bag and withdrew a file. I have something for you, evidence of other corruption in Frederick's old business circle. People who haven't been caught yet. This caught Matthew's attention. You're still investigating? Always. A small smile crossed Elizabeth's face. Old habits die hard. Besides, someone needs to make sure nothing like this happens again. Back at his office later that day, Mindy found him reviewing the files his mother had provided. How did it go? She asked, setting a coffee on his desk. She's more like him than I realized, Matthew replied. Just as calculating, just as patient. She just picked a different target. Does that bother you?
No.
He closed the file, looking up at Mindy. It makes me respect her more. She played her role perfectly, gathered her evidence, and struck at exactly the right moment. Mindy sat down across from him. I've been thinking about what you said, about creating a foundation to help victims of corporate fraud. I think it's a good idea. Matthew nodded. People need to know they have options, that they don't have to remain victims. Like Terry, she could have stayed silent, kept taking his abuse. Instead, she documented everything, prepared for the day someone would finally act. You gave her that chance, Mindy pointed out. You protected her, made sure she was safe, and now we can do the same for others. Matthew pulled up a document on his computer. I've already started the paperwork. The foundation will provide legal support, protection, resources for whistleblowers. Their discussion was interrupted by another knock, Blake with his final report. The private investigator had been monitoring the aftermath of Frederick's conviction, tracking the ripple effects through the business community. Most of his old associates have gone to ground, Blake reported. The ones who haven't been arrested are trying to hide their connections, destroy evidence. Let them try, Matthew replied, gesturing to his mother's files. We have what we need to find them. The conversation shifted to practical matters, setting up the foundation, reorganizing the company, planning for the future. Matthew remained focused, methodical, showing the same attention to detail that had helped him destroy his father's empire. Later that evening, as the office emptied, Mindy lingered. She'd been by his side through everything, loyal, supportive, never questioning his methods or his motives. You know, she said carefully, it's okay to feel something about all this. About Frederick, Catherine, everything that happened. Matthew looked up from his work. I feel exactly what I should, satisfaction that justice was served. Anything else would be a waste of energy. But Mindy knew him too well to accept that. You're not your father, Matthew. Being ruthless when necessary doesn't mean you have to be cold all the time. He considered this, remembering how Frederick's coldness had ultimately been his weakness, making him blind to the loyalty he'd inspired in people like Terry. Perhaps, he acknowledged. But trust and emotion have to be earned. And have I earned them? Mindy asked quietly. Matthew studied her for a long moment. She had stood with him through everything, had helped him plan and execute his revenge, had never once wavered in her support. Yes, he said finally. You have. The new penthouse was different from the one he'd shared with Catherine. Modern, minimalist, uncluttered by false pretenses or hidden agendas. Matthew stood in his study, reviewing the latest reports from the foundation. In its first month of operation, they'd already received dozens of calls from whistleblowers, people with evidence of corporate corruption who needed protection and support. His mother sat in one of the leather chairs, discussing potential cases. She'd become an invaluable advisor, her years of secret observation giving her insight into how corruption worked, how it could be detected and exposed. This one, she said, highlighting a file. The pattern matches what Frederick used to do. Hidden accounts, phantom projects, missing funds. Matthew reviewed the details. Have Blake look into it. If there's evidence, we'll move forward. Their working relationship had evolved into something new, not quite the mother-son bond they'd once had, but a partnership based on shared purpose and mutual respect. Mindy entered with more files, her presence as natural in his home now as it had been in his office. The DA's office called, she reported. They're using our investigation methods as a template for other cases. Apparently, we've created a new standard for exposing corporate fraud. Matthew allowed himself a small smile. What had begun as personal revenge had evolved into something larger. A systematic approach to fighting corruption, protecting whistleblowers, holding the powerful accountable. Have you heard about Catherine? His mother asked carefully. She's left the city, Matthew replied without emotion. Blake's keeping tabs on her. She's staying with distant relatives, trying to rebuild some kind of life. And Frederick? Still in prison, still requesting meetings. Matthew's voice remained cold, still not getting any response. The conversation shifted to more practical matters, new cases, potential investigations, the Foundation's growing influence. Matthew remained focused, methodical, but there was something different now. His ruthlessness had found a new purpose, his determination channeled into protecting others from the kind of betrayal he'd experienced. As evening approached, his mother prepared to leave. At the door, she paused. You know, you've created something important here. Something that could help a lot of people. Matthew nodded. That's the point. Every corrupt businessman, every fraudster, every betrayer should know they're not safe. That someone's watching, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. After she left, Mindy joined him in the study. Their relationship had deepened over the months, built on a foundation of trust and understanding that neither of them took for granted. The Foundation's getting another major donation, she reported. Apparently, your reputation for exposing corruption has made an impression. Good, Matthew replied. The more resources we have, the more cases we can take on. He turned away from his desk, looking at her directly. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. For standing with me through all of this. Mindy met his gaze steadily. I believed in what you were doing. I still do. Their moment was interrupted by Blake calling with another potential case. More corruption, more people needing help. Matthew listened carefully, already planning the investigation. This was his life now. Not just a lawyer, not just a businessman, but someone who had turned his own experience with betrayal into a weapon against corruption. He remained ruthless, calculating, precise. But now those qualities served a larger purpose. The sun had set over the city, but Matthew kept working. There were always more cases, more people needing help, more corruption to expose. He had found his true calling, not in revenge, but in justice. Not in destruction, but in protection. He was no longer just the son who had destroyed his father's empire. He was something more, a defender of those who couldn't defend themselves, a protector of those who dared to stand against corruption. The betrayal that had started his journey was behind him now, but its lessons remained. Trust had to be earned, loyalty had to be proven, and justice had to be pursued relentlessly. These were the principles he lived by, the standards he upheld, the legacy he was building. Matthew Whitehead had emerged from his father's shadow not by becoming a different man, but by channeling his ruthlessness, his precision, his determination into a cause greater than himself. He had taken everything his father had taught him about power and corruption and turned it into a weapon against those very things. This was his new dawn, not a softening of his nature, but a refinement of it. Not a change in who he was, but an evolution in how he used his skills. The ruthless lawyer who had destroyed his father's empire had become something more. A guardian against corruption, a protector of the vulnerable, a force for justice in a world that desperately needed it. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Corporate Fraud Prevention Foundation's annual gala drew the city's elite, business leaders, politicians, and journalists, all eager to show their support for the organization that had become the most feared watchdog in corporate America. In 5 years, Matthew Whitehead's foundation had exposed dozens of corruption schemes, protected hundreds of whistleblowers, and fundamentally changed how corporate crime was investigated and prosecuted. Matthew stood at the podium, his presence commanding attention without effort. Age had only sharpened his features, adding gravitas to his reputation. The whispers in the crowd told the story. This was the man who'd taken down his own father's corrupt empire, who'd turned personal betrayal into a mission for justice. 5 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the silent room. I witnessed firsthand how corruption destroys not just businesses, but lives. Today, we've helped recover over $2 billion in stolen funds and brought hundreds of white-collar criminals to justice. In the audience, Mindy Whitehead, they'd married 2 years after Frederick's conviction, watched her husband with pride. Their partnership had evolved from professional collaboration to personal connection, built on a foundation of absolute trust and shared purpose. She now served as the foundation's chief legal officer, her sharp instincts for deception complementing Matthew's strategic mind. After the speech, during the reception, Blake Sweeney approached with his latest report. The private investigator, now heading the Foundation's investigation division, maintained his trademark precision and dry wit. "Thought you'd want to see this," Blake said quietly, handing Matthew a file. "Latest update on your father and Catherine." Matthew opened the file, reviewing its contents with clinical detachment. Frederick William, 5 years into his 25-year sentence, had aged dramatically in prison. His attempts to maintain influence through old business connections had failed. Matthew's foundation had systematically exposed and dismantled every remnant of his corrupt network. "He's still requesting visits," Blake continued. "Monthly like clockwork." "Same response as always," Matthew replied, closing the file. In 5 years, he hadn't once visited his father. Every letter, every request for contact, had been logged and filed away unanswered. And Catherine? Blake pulled up another report on his tablet. Still in Seattle, working as a real estate agent under her maiden name. She tried to rebuild her social connections there, but he shrugged. "Your foundation's reputation makes people nervous. Nobody in the corporate world wants to associate with someone connected to the William case." The report included recent photographs. Catherine Prince, once the epitome of sophisticated beauty, now looked worn, her designer clothes replaced by off-the-rack business suits, her confident smile now careful and hesitant. The miscarriage had left her unable to have children, a final twist of fate that had destroyed her dreams of securing her future through motherhood. "She's been seeing a therapist," Blake added. "Apparently, she's trying to make amends. Wanted to write you a letter of apology." "No contact." Matthew's voice was firm. "Same as always." Across the room, Elizabeth Whitehead was deep in conversation with a group of corporate executives. Matthew's mother had found her calling as the Foundation's chief advisor on detecting corporate fraud. Her years of secretly documenting Frederick's crimes had given her unique insight into how corruption hidden behind respectable facades. "Your mother's latest detection protocol is revolutionary," Blake commented. 3 major firms have already adopted it." Matthew nodded with approval. His relationship with his mother had evolved into a powerful partnership. They never discussed Frederick directly, focusing instead on their shared mission of exposing corruption. It wasn't traditional maternal warmth, but it was something equally valuable: mutual respect and shared purpose. Terry Wilson, now the Foundation's director of whistleblower protection, approached with her own update. The formerly timid assistant had transformed into a confident advocate, using her experience to help others escape abusive corporate environments. "The Thompson case is ready to move forward," she reported. "The evidence pattern matches exactly what we saw with your father's operations." "Good," Matthew replied. "Make sure the whistleblowers have full protection before we proceed. I want everything in place before we move." The evening continued, a celebration of the Foundation's success and a warning to anyone who might consider following Frederick Williams' corrupt path. Matthew moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his reputation preceding him. Everyone knew his story, the ruthless lawyer who destroyed his own father's empire rather than allow corruption to continue. Later that night, in their penthouse overlooking the city, Mindy found Matthew in his study, reviewing case files. "I saw the reports about Frederick and Catherine," she said, setting a coffee on his desk. "You okay?" Matthew looked up, his expression unchanged. "Why wouldn't I be? They're exactly where they deserve to be. Most people would feel something, seeing their father age in prison. Most people didn't have a father who plotted their murder," Matthew replied coolly. "Frederick made his choices. So did Catherine. They're living with the consequences." Mindy understood. In 5 years of marriage, she'd learned that Matthew's ruthlessness wasn't a facade or a response to trauma. It was his nature, tempered by principle rather than emotion. He'd simply chosen to direct it toward protecting others rather than pursuing personal vengeance. His phone buzzed. Another former associate of Frederick's had been indicted, their corruption exposed by the Foundation's investigation. Matthew allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Every conviction was another vindication of his methods, another proof that his father's way of doing business wouldn't be tolerated. The latest business news played on a screen in his office. Elias Lutz had been denied parole again. The former politician had tried to rebuild his reputation through charity work in prison, but Matthew's foundation had ensured his corruption wouldn't be forgotten. Blake mentioned Catherine wants to apologize, Mindy said carefully. There's nothing to apologize for, Matthew replied, his voice devoid of emotion. She showed me who she really was. That knowledge was valuable. Indeed, Catherine's betrayal had taught him crucial lessons about trust and loyalty. Those lessons now protected others, helped him identify corrupt executives and corporate predators before they could destroy more lives. His mother had sent him an email, another potential case, another corruption scheme that matched Frederick's old patterns. Even after 5 years, they were still finding traces of his father's influence in the business world. Each discovery reinforced Matthew's conviction that his foundation's work was essential. A news alert flashed across his screen. Another wealthy businessman arrested, his corruption exposed by evidence gathered using the foundation's methods. Matthew had created something lasting, something that would continue exposing and punishing betrayal long after the personal wounds that inspired it had faded. The foundation's new training program launches next week, Mindy reminded him. Law enforcement agencies from 3 countries are sending representatives. Matthew nodded with satisfaction. What had begun as personal revenge had evolved into a global mission. His father's betrayal had sparked something larger than himself, a systematic approach to fighting corruption that would outlast all of them. In his private moments, Matthew sometimes reflected on the changes 5 years had brought. He hadn't softened. If anything, his reputation for ruthlessness had grown. But now that ruthlessness served a purpose beyond personal vengeance. He transformed his pain into power, his betrayal into a weapon against corruption. Frederick William remained in his prison cell, his request for contact filed away unread. Catherine Prince lived her quiet life in Seattle, her past following her like a shadow. They had betrayed him, plotted his destruction, and in return, he had ensured they would spend the rest of their lives living with the consequences of their choices. But their story had become just one case among many. Matthew's foundation now dealt with dozens of corruption cases, protected scores of whistleblowers, exposed countless schemes. He had taken everything he'd learned from destroying his father's empire and turned it into a methodology for fighting corruption everywhere. The night deepened, but Matthew continued working. There were always more cases, more corruption to expose, more people needing protection. He had built something that transcended personal revenge, a legacy of justice that would continue long after the personal wounds that inspired it had faded into history. In the end, Frederick and Catherine's betrayal had given him something valuable, a purpose, a mission, a way to turn his natural ruthlessness into a force for justice. They had tried to destroy him, and instead, they had helped create something indestructible. Matthew closed the last file and stood by his window, surveying the city. Somewhere out there, his father sat in his prison cell, and Catherine lived her diminished life, both of them carrying the weight of their choices. But he had moved beyond them, beyond revenge, beyond personal betrayal. He had become something more than they could have imagined. Not just the son who destroyed his father's empire, but the man who had transformed personal vengeance into a mission for justice. Their betrayal had been the catalyst, but his response had created a legacy that would outlast them all. The foundation would continue its work, exposing corruption, protecting whistleblowers, ensuring that those who betrayed trust would face consequences. And Matthew would continue leading it, his ruthlessness tempered by purpose, his determination focused on protection rather than revenge. It was, he reflected, a fitting epilogue to their story. They had tried to destroy him through betrayal, and instead, they had helped create something that would destroy corruption itself. In the end, that was the best revenge of all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.